Thank you, Jupal, for sharing what EasyMod is doing and also those images from people who are living in one of the areas most affected by climate change today. Yusuf, can you share with us what you're doing at quite a different scale at the UNFCCC?
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Drupad, for those inspiring images from the Himalayas. Certainly a lot of very good work happening in EasyMod. Last year, I opened my statement at this very forum when it was held in Thailand by repeating a quote from a Harvard professor, which went like this. This is the very first time in history where, due to climate change, human beings are obligated to collectively plan for the next 100 years. The main global forum through which this collective planning takes place is the UNFCCC international negotiations under the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which seeks to achieve global consensus on shared action on climate change, especially in the longer term. I work at the UNFCCC Secretariat, which supports these negotiations, and there I am in charge of adaptation issues. My storyline today for you is one of transition, one of rites of passage, realignment of our approach to adaptation. A few years ago, we initiated a negotiating process to revamp the international approach to adaptation. It came in response to a number of challenges identified by countries. One of them was fragmentation. Fragmentation of action on adaptation, fragmentation of support at different levels. There was many things happening on adaptation, in many cases not done coherently, disjointed, lacking synergy. At the same time, there was very limited thinking of long-term adaptation in countries that were being supported, partly because of unpredictable and unsustainable resource availability, which impeded capacity of countries to plan ahead for 10, 20 years, let alone longer than that. There was also a tendency in thinking of adaptation within specific sectors, within specific ecosystems, specific hazards, but very little holistic consideration of adaptation. And a corollary of all that was that most adaptation action happened as individual projects. All of these challenges were very explicitly vocalized by the parties to our convention at the start of the negotiating process that led to the next phase of adaptation, and served as the backdrop to our thinking. Fortunately, we had a lot of good groundwork being done by way of national communications, national adaptation programs of action, which identified urgent and immediate needs of LDCs in adaptation, and also other assessments undertaken at the regional, national, or subnational level. And the negotiating process under the UNFCCC, as a result, came up with what came to be known as the Cancun Adaptation Framework, which harbored the approach for the next generation of international action on adaptation. Not sure how clear this is on your screens. I think it's visible enough. You may have heard in the course of this conference that mitigation had a head start. It received much of the interest of the international community in the early days, much of the resources. Adaptation was a latecomer. Before even this phase of adaptation was agreed, the Cancun Adaptation Framework, which you see as the CAF with its 3 components there, we already had a couple of initiatives going on internationally on adaptation, which are worth mentioning. One of them is work on scientific and technological advice, which was done through a partnership program for knowledge sharing known as the Nairobi Work Program, which has 270 partner entities, and these days is focusing more on the sectoral and regional level. In fact, tomorrow we are organizing under the Nairobi Work Program a workshop on ecosystems-based adaptation in Dar es Salaam. The second initiative that had started earlier on is that of the NAPAs, National Adaptation Programs of Action, whereby LDCs identified the urgent and immediate adaptation needs. Most of the NAPA preparations have been concluded, and countries are now in the process of implementation. Now came the CAF, the Cancun Adaptation Framework, which sought to defragment adaptation, have a more long-term outlook to it. You'll see in the middle there something called the Adaptation Committee, which is a group of high-level members, 16 members, mandated to promote the coherent implementation of adaptation through advice, through promoting synergy, through considering and sharing information, knowledge, and recommendations. So this holistic overview of adaptation as instilled through the newly formed Adaptation Committee is expected to help instill coherence in adaptation work and deal with the fragmentation problem. Above that, you'll see national adaptation plans, another new initiative. The formulation and implementation of NAPS is now a very important pillar of the Cancun Adaptation Framework. It focuses on medium and long-term adaptation, builds on the NAPAs. It also transitions us from this short-term project-based approach to adaptation into a more longer-term programmatic approach. So we're looking at having adaptation programs identified by each country. The third pillar that you see down there, and you might have heard it mentioned a couple of times here yesterday, is the work program on loss and damage. This is still at a conceptual stage. The thinking has not been concluded on that, but it basically aims to address unavoidable losses that exceed a society's capacity for adaptation. So the role of the international community in helping to address these types of losses is currently being deliberated on. So you'll see that the thinking is really evolving towards more holism, more comprehensiveness. We have adaptation plans to cover the normal national level action and also loss and damage to take up what is left over from that, and we have an adaptation committee to instill coherence on top of all of that. Let me take you into the details of some of these initiatives here. The NAP process, National Adaptation Plans. A couple of days ago, the technical guidelines for the preparation of the NAPs have been cleared by the LDC expert group, which is a group of experts that has been tasked with helping out with this process. As you can see here, there are 17 steps in implementing the NAPs. I won't take you into the details, but I'm happy to talk bilaterally if you're interested. Just to highlight box A, top right side, in laying the groundwork, you'll see that it's very information and knowledge intensive. It's intended to, the process is intended to focus very much on rigorous scientific information, on knowledge that probably will need a lot of effort from us to create, manage, and disseminate. I'll also take you to the bottom left corner, which is implementation strategy. And there you will see that the holistic approach we're talking about is being highlighted clearly, including synergy, coordination, and integration in national planning. Moving on to the loss and damage discourse. As I mentioned, because of the incipient stage of thinking on this matter, we're still in a process of conceptualization. we've undergone maybe 3 streams of innovation, of evolution of this idea. One is generating and synthesizing knowledge through initial research, literature reviews, and technical papers, which you see towards the left. The second is sharing knowledge through regional workshops that we had last year in order to bring everyone on the same page with what is known about the subject. And the third one is basically moving towards institutional arrangements, in particular defining the role of the international regime, the UNFCCC process, within the context of loss and damage. And there's a paragraph there in red, which is the recent decision by our last conference of the parties in Doha, which decided to establish institutional arrangements such as an international mechanism to address loss and damage in accordance with the role of the convention. Now, the decision envisages that such agreement will come later this year in November at the 19th session of the Conference of the Parties, which will be held in Warsaw. And so there's really quite a short time left to elaborate on the nature of these institutional arrangements. And between now and then, there will be quite a few meetings held. There's a lot of initiatives. Already 3 or 4 have taken place in different parts of the world to try to bring our thinking together on the same page on what type of institutional arrangements would be useful for addressing these unavoidable losses that surpass adaptation capacity. We talked about several of the challenges in the first slide. We've seen how this Cancun adaptation framework has addressed them, maybe except for one, the predictability of resources. And I've not dedicated a slide to that because we've heard so many times about the advent of the Green Climate Fund and the potential $100 billion a year that are supposed to be made available as of 2020 onwards, and the expectation that these will be balanced between mitigation and adaptation. And of course, auspiciously, it will be hosted here in Songdo. You'll see that on the far right side of this graphic, there's a big $sign which predicts the availability of these funds by 2020. But before that, you'll notice that between now and then, we really are undergoing this transitional phase. The design of all these new institutions so that they are mature enough in time for countries to have absorptive capacity for this scaling up of resources and scaling up of action by 2020. You're seeing that in COP19, which is the end of this year, we expect an agreement on what the loss and damage mechanism will look like, and what I call NWP2, which is the follow-up arrangements for our knowledge partnership program, the Nairobi Work Program. This will also be revised at the end of this year. Next year, 2014, there will be a revision of the role of the Adaptation Committee. COP21, 2015, there's the expectation of having a global comprehensive agreement. With mitigation, we pretty much know where we're heading there, but with adaptation, it's still unclear. There's a process that is starting now to discuss what the contents of that agreement will be under what's called the ad hoc group on the Durban platform. And we still have an unclear idea on what it will include beyond what we have now on adaptation. Now, between 2015 and 2020 is really the setting up phase of the post-2020 regime on both mitigation and adaptation. But all of this is not happening in a vacuum. There's quite a few milestones between now and 2015 with a lot of deliverables coming in from other parts of the international spectrum. For example, the successor of the Hyogo Framework of Action to be agreed by 2015, the successor to the MDGs in the post-2015 agenda. There's a process to review the long-term global goal of the convention, which will also come to conclusion on 2015. And of course, there's the fifth assessment report of the IPCC, which starts to become available from the end of this year. Now, one has to also see this within another type of evolving positive backdrop. I talked about a holistic approach, and I've noticed that a lot of processes going on are already adopting these holistic approaches. One example, I was inspired by a publication outside by ADB, Investing in Resilience, which proposes addressing that theme by creating future visions and using backcasting in a way that forces holistic thinking, no longer focused on a specific sector, a specific hazard, but very, very holistic. A second trend I'm seeing is a positive move towards improvements in adaptive capacity. And a couple of days ago, the new Human Development Report by UNDP was launched, and it's entitled Rise of the South. In it, it says that we are experiencing now an unprecedented level of upheaval in living conditions and rise from poverty. So more than 40 developing countries have surpassed by far the expected human development gains in recent decades, and more are entering into that group by way of the momentum established. But of course, a lot still remains to be done, particularly for the most vulnerable societies, especially in LDCs and SIDS. Before concluding, let me get back to one of the main pillars of this conference, which is knowledge, something that has been included in practically every single presentation I've seen here. I have mentioned in the context of NAPs, National Adaptation Plans, that information and knowledge will be a very important building block for enabling countries to develop their national adaptation plans. And in fact, this is true for all the adaptation work streams as action is scaled up in the post-2020 regime. The benefits, of course, are clear. I've mentioned some of them here, to enable informed strategic interventions and decisions, especially across thematic and administrative boundaries, avoid fragmentation, avoid knowledge fogs, misuse of information and knowledge,